Hey everyone, and welcome back to the SaaS Developer community where we learn from each other how to build SaaS applications. And with me today, I have Shahar and Gal from Keep, and they joined us to talk about what is usually a very popular topic. We're going to talk about observability and about alerting and how we can make the entire observability and alerting world a lot better. So welcome to the show, Shahar and Tal.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Happy
much.
to be here.
Yeah, so tell us a bit about yourself and what you're building.
Amazing. So first of all, I'm Tal. This is Shahar. We know each other for a decade now. We started working together back at the Israeli Defense Forces. It's a unit called A200. It's like the Israeli NSA equivalent. And we always dreamed about starting our own startup one day. 3 years ago, we joined the forces working as the two founding engineers for an Israeli startup called Anecdotes, a compliance automation platform. And we led a team of 30 engineers there for like 2.5 years. We got accepted into Y Combinator 3 months ago. And we are here in San Francisco for the Y Combinator batch since then.
Yeah, we are going back to Israel in 2 weeks, and for the last 3 months, we are working on Keep, which we will talk during this session.
Yeah, and you recently launched, or at least soft launched Keep as part of the Y Combinator, I guess. Is it called Bootcamp? It's not a bootcamp. Incubator. Incubator.
Startup accelerator. I think that's the phrase they use for themselves. And yeah, we like this is a YC pattern launch as soon as possible, and like we actually pivoted from a different idea mid-batch. And we started working on open source that we wanted for ourselves. We'll talk about it more later, but this is like the Keep open source CLI. We launched it. We showed it on Hacker News. It went pretty viral, and we're working on it since then.
Amazing. Yeah. So when we discussed things that you wanted to share and talk about, you brought up your ideas around observability and the fact that you did a lot of research into the observability space and offered to map it out for us a bit. So
the observability space is huge, and I first started playing with observability like 9 or 10 years ago, and I can say that since then it like made a huge progress. There are a lot of like different definitions for what's observability, but let's keep like the OpenTelemetry definition, which says that observability basically composed of 3 other components, which are logs, traces, and metrics. Logs is basically a time-stamped message which your services produce during their runtime, and traces are similar to log, but like they are attached for a specific request. So imagine if you have some request, or if you
it's
build
like the journey of the request that gets to your services.
Yeah, and finally, a metric is just a measurement about the service, like usually a numeric measurement, like CPU or memory, and like over time you can identify patterns, errors, and things like that. So all of those 3 components, logs, traces, and metrics, builds an observability, which is like understanding the system from the outside, and lets you ask questions about how the system works without really understanding how like the inner workings of the system.
I think it mainly became like a big thing when more companies went to the path of microservices, and like SaaS businesses, new SaaS businesses usually build the architecture in a more microservice way of looking, and like observability became a very important part of that because it's no longer a monolith with a single database. You have multi-tenancy, you have lots of services, you have lots of databases, and it makes your life easier when you want to have a picture of how things work underneath all the complex architecture that you have.
Oh man, you said so many good things, and I need to slow down and unpack a bit of it. So,
Sure.
you started by talking about transformation in the space, and you mentioned that, hey, let's go with the OpenTelemetry definition because everyone is moving into OpenTelemetry. Do you think that is the cause of the transformation? Like OpenTelemetry showing up as a standard?
So I think OpenTelemetry was a solution for a problem, and the problem was the problem that Tal mentioned, which is the system became more complex and more distributed. Like when you start building cloud-native application, you see more microservices and more components. So OpenTelemetry was an initiative that like aggregated few other projects. Open Tracing is what Open Tracing and Open Metrics, and it's an like architecture or specification for solution for the problem Tal just mentioned about the complexity of distributed systems.
Yeah, but absolutely, it helped for the adoption of observability as standard for those companies, for those businesses, because it became a lot more easier to have observability for your services without like breaking your head on how to implement that, or how can you get to a point that you have good observability. And it's standardized like how you do that. You have a large community. That's like the open of the OpenTelemetry. It's open source. There is a big community. There are people you can speak with, and the adoption is very easy. It's like it's a concept that we really like. It's called auto instrumentation, which basically means that with like 3, 4, 5 lines of code, you can have observability implemented in your services, and it's quite amazing actually.
Yeah. So the problem was basically that as we have more microservices, we can no longer understand the system just by grabbing a single file. We needed a lot more ways to track and correlate things that happen in different parts. And then OpenTelemetry came along as a standard. And I think the promise of a standard is really that there will be a lot of tools that you can mix and match around it, right? And maybe that's why you can instrument with few lines of code because someone built the tooling, and then this instrumentation can actually be used elsewhere. That match what you observe? Like we have a lot of tools and they all play nicely with each other?
I think you see a whole field or space of startups like building on top of OpenTelemetry. We just have like another company in the batch that generating tests using your OpenTelemetry data, and you have profiling using OpenTelemetry data, and you see a lot of like an entire ecosystem like on top of OpenTelemetry. So like OpenTelemetry produces like SDKs and tools and deployments methods, and like all of the big players in the observability space now support OpenTelemetry. So yeah, it's a big thing.
So before I switch over to talk about alerting, is there anything I'm missing about OpenTelemetry or about observability that I should be asking you and I don't?
I think one big trend we see when we talk with engineers and engineering manager is the consolidation in those observability space. We see like a few years ago, we had dedicated products for logging and dedicated products for tracing and dedicated products for metrics. Now we see that every big player has all of them. So you now can use like choose whatever tool you prefer and have like holistic solution for all of the observability pillars, like metrics, logs, and traces.
Yeah, I think another thing that is important to like remember is that OpenTelemetry only started at 2019, I think. And it only then like became like a mass adoption for that. So it's still early, but we still see like a lot of things going on the last few years. And as Shahar said, consolidation around observability in general. It's a very hot space, and there's a lot of things going on over there right now.
Yeah, I think a good example for that will be the fourth pillar that OpenTelemetry started to kick off, which is the profiling pillar. They are adding it to the logs, tracing, and metrics, but it's still young. It's still like under design, so it will take, I guess, few months until it will be working process in progress.
Yeah, but it makes sense, right? I mean, people now still do profiling, they just do it in a completely separate way that doesn't really, it's again hard to integrate with the rest of the ecosystem.
Yeah, I
So
think it will
that
be
makes a lot
amazing.
of sense.
I think it will be amazing when like profiling will be part of OpenTelemetry. Just imagine how many new tools will be built upon of that, like that,
Yeah.
optimizing your code.
You can see some of them already, but yeah, it's a world that needs also like standardization, and it's obvious that it will happen.
So with this understanding of the world, where we have an open standard, a lot of tools built around it, and a lot of big players that kind of consolidate everything into one place, where does alerting really fit in now?
What do you do with all this data that you now have? Yeah, I think alerting is just like another artifact that you get from all the data that you now have with observability in place. And I think it's important just like to put it in simpler terms, because I'm not sure everybody like we heard a lot of terms for alerting. For some tools it's alarming, for some tools it's monitoring. So just like to explain what's an alert, when we speak about alerts, it's the warning signals that you get when something is about to get broken in your product, or it's already broken and you want to proactively go to your customer and tell them that you're on top of things.
So there are several like types of alerts. Like we see it metric based or threshold based alerts, which are basically if some number exceeds threshold alert. For example, it can be trigger if a CPU exceeds 90% for more than 5 minutes, or it can be alert if the number of requests that gets errored in like the last 5 minutes exceeded the threshold. So this is the classic type of alerts. We also see log-based alert, which means that if some logs arriving one by one or together, so alert. And the third category of alert, which I think is the new category, is
developing right now.
Yeah, it's the SLO based alert. Basically, you define SLI and SLO, and if you see that SLO going to be exceeded, it's called the error budget rate, right? If you see that it's going to meet, you trigger an alert about this SLO. So I think
SLO is a service level objective. Basically, you can, like the example is that you want to see that no, like your service has a percentage of errors that you are fine with. And if it goes above this number, then you want to be notified and like to proactively go and make your service better to meet the budget that Shahar just described.
I think it's somewhat different perspective on like production environments. Instead of looking from the point of view of the system itself, you kind of shift the perspective to the point of view of the customers, and then you ask yourself when the customer will feel that something goes wrong, and that's basically the SLI, and from that you derive an SLO, which is what, like, if you concluded that customer will think there is an error if the web page will load in 2 seconds, then you define that as an SLO.
So just for the listeners, I want to make a note. A few weeks back, we had a conversation in the channel with a principal SRE from Workday, and he shared how he uses exactly what you call the error budget for the SLO to negotiate with his product management team. So if the error budget, if we're running out of error budgets, if we're about to break our SLO, he can basically say, hey, we're not delivering any feature this month. We're only spending our engineering time stabilizing the system. And this looked absolutely brilliant use of what would otherwise be a bit depressing. Hey, our system is not very stable. So I'm just want, if you are suffering from too many errors, maybe also worth going to listen to his
Yeah,
tips.
yeah, definitely
But
worth.
but obviously nobody wants to suffer from too many errors. And when you posted in your blog, you had the kind of current problems in alerting. That was like the number one problem you guys pointed at, is that people actually have too many alerts.
Yeah, so for the last couple of weeks, we talked with as much as engineers, engineering manager, and SREs as we could, and we kind of find an interesting like 5 categories of problems that are in the alerting space. The top one is the alert fatigue. It's basically what you just mentioned when you receive too many alerts. So it can be challenging to determine which are the critical and which can be ignored.
We like the analogy of for less technical people. I don't know if that's like the people who see the podcast, but we like the analogy of a WhatsApp group that you just muted forever because there is so much noise over there. So it's just like having many alerts is just like having none, because eventually software developers, they just mute the Slack channel where they receive the alerts, and then it makes no sense to have those alerts.
That's
So
what we
before
saw.
we move on to additional problems, I just, something that came to my mind, we talked about the microservices architecture, and you have all those services and complex interactions. And obviously, every single one of those services and their database and their logs have all to be monitored, observed. They probably have alerts. So the same force that caused observability to happen is also driving toward what you see is too many alerts and the alert fatigue that follows. So if something happens, you can get alerted by like 300 different services at the same time.
Yeah, I think that like we're speaking about like the adoption of observability brings so much data into the table. Like organizations, developers organization are exploding with data right now. And yeah, absolutely, like having alerting is something that like lives throughout as the product grows. And as the product grows, you have more services, you have more databases, you have like the tech stack also grows, and you have more types of services. And yeah, absolutely, like you get more alerts. As you get more alerts, some of the old alerts are no longer relevant, or they need to be adjusted, and you get more alerts due to that. And it like in the end, it gets to a point where it just gets out of control, and then you experience what we call alert fatigue.
Yeah, unless you kill it like when it's young, we heard about teams that every 2 weeks like reevaluate all of their alerts. We heard about teams where the group manager kind of asking about every alert that no one like took care of. But again, this is like a cultural thing. It depends on the company and on the specific persons. We also talked with teams within the same company, and you can see that for one team the alerts work fine, but for the other teams it doesn't. And they basically use the same stack, the same tools, the same everything, and still it can be challenging.
Yeah, I love the idea that some managers actively push back against alerts, because I've seen a lot of the reverse where every postmortem, if you look what are the action items, it's always, oh, we need more alerts.
Yeah,
and,
yeah,
and, and another thing is that usually like those postmortems also like show you that you had the alert that could have like prevent this postmortem, but nobody was looking on those alerts because there was so much noise. And then like most of the time the action item is go and fix the alerts that we already have, or adjust the threshold so we can catch those kind of things next time that it happens.
A nice quote from someone we talk with was that he doesn't care about not knowing about the error for the first time. He only cares about don't knowing about it for the second time. So that's kind of what alerting is for.
Yeah, exactly. It's very reactive in a way. So what other problems did you guys run into?
So I'll continue like from the point I dropped before. So the second problem we see is your monitoring. So let's imagine you define an alert, you deploy into your observability tools, but then how you know the alert itself works. Like you need to monitor that the alert really monitors what it should. So we talked with, it's kind of abstract, but we talked with a lot of people that kind of created some internal scripts that triggers the error they try to monitor, and then they catch them on the other side. So it won't trigger a real alert, but they just want to verify that the alert works. And then they kind of defined another alert if if the original alert doesn't work. So that's the common pattern to overcome your monitoring problem.
I think it connects with what I said before, that alerts is not like do and forget. It's something that you have to adjust and maintain as your product grows. And this is like also the third point of problems in the alert space, is that it's actually something that you have to maintain, which then means that you need someone to maintain it, and you need time for the maintenance of the alerts. And as the system changes, services become more complex, requires more resources, and you have to adjust and change like the threshold that you set, or the SLOs that you configured. And this is something that you actually have to give time to. So it's another problem. I think another thing that is a real problem in the alerting space, maybe it's in general in the observability space, is that because you have so many different products, lots of the times you just lack experience in a product, which then leads to like you have the learning curve, and it becomes very hard to like learn a specific way of how to do alerts in that product. And then you get to a point where you have alerts, but they're not good enough. So it like it also doesn't help with the alert fatigue, but also like the alerts that you think that you have are not good enough, and the problem is even bigger.
I think
Yeah.
people sometimes underestimate how much observability and tools can be complex, and how many features they have that you like no one taught you about, and you like basically needs to know without the appropriate like training or experience.
Absolutely. Everything you say just resonates so much. I can think of like, I don't know, 5, 6 different examples of literally every problem you brought up. One of the concepts you mentioned in your blogs that really was kind of a light bulb moment for me, and I think you just touched on it right now, is really the idea that your alerting is code. And it requires testing, it requires some kind of a deployment, a maintenance plan. We talked about the guy who negotiated time for his team to take care of his infrastructure. I'm betting that some of this time went to improving the alerts and reviewing them. So now that we have this insight that, oh my God, alerts are actually code and I have to test it and I have to maintain it, what's next?
You wanna?
Yeah, I think like it takes us to the point like of what we're doing at Keep, and how we want to help organizations like solve the problems that we just described. And you talked about having alerts as code, and this is like when we started this conversation, we said that we like wrote the tool that we wanted for ourselves for alerting, and this is like the open source that we released not so long ago, and it's exactly what you just said. The way we see alerts, the way we think as the like the developers in us, is that as a developer, you don't like going inside all these different UIs, learning how to do things in those products. You just want to write your code. You want to have your tests in your code, and you also want to have your alerts in code. So that was like the the main guideline for us when we build the open source that we're building at Keep. We wanted to have the alerts described as simple YAML files that are very readable, at least for software developers. And yeah, that's like the thing we yeah, because I heard someone saying like, why are you saying YAMLs are easy? It's easy for it's not an easy thing. So the alerts are now managed by code, or at least like they are described in a textual way that is easily digestible by code afterwards. And it was something that was very important for us to like start with.
Yeah, so I am imagining that if it's code and it has tests and it has deployments and all that, it will also have code reviews. So if I make a change to my alerting, someone else will actually see it, know about it, unlike someone logged into Datadog and made a change that who knows?
In our vision, I think, imagine you as a developer adding a new endpoint to your service. You create a PR, and then KeepBot, which doesn't exist yet but will exist, will suggest you new alerts, and you will be able to accept those, and then the bot will push them, like deploy them to your favorite observability tool. So like from developer experience perspective, all what you need to do is just to like accept or reject or fine tune the new alerts suggested by the bot. So it's kind of
Ooh. So it's like dependable for GitHub only with alerts.
yeah.
I think like what I mentioned before, that alert is something that lives with your product. So software development lifecycle has a lots of different parts in it, and the way we see it is that we want to integrate as part of your CI/CD processes. And like what Shahar said, it's like for new code that you insert, but also like for your existing code, when you change something, when you change a log, when you change a metric, we want to be a gate in your CI/CD processes and just tell you when you are going to break an alert. So what Shahar mentioned before, like the monitoring of your monitors, we want to help you understand when those monitors are going to break.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking I would pay good money for something that would just prevent deploying non-monitored APIs, essentially. Like, I mean, it always feels like monitoring and alerting is playing catch up. You release things, and then 2 weeks later, someone's like, "Oh, it's in production. Is it more, are there any alerts configured over there?" And everyone is like, yeah, I guess we should have done some kind of process to make sure it is." So this
Until you
sounds
get to
brilliant.
the next postmortem, and then you add the alerts for the code that you released before. Yeah.
Exactly. You get to the postmortem, and then there is an executive saying, "What are developers deployed to production without adding alert?" And everyone looks a bit embarrassed, and there may be even a process on how to release to production, which you follow unless you're in a hurry. And who knows, maybe deploying production often happens when you're in a hurry.
Talent me likes to think about alerts. Same developers looks about like testing. So if tests are from pre-production, alerting are tests for post-production.
Yeah, and I think you just mentioned like executives yelling at you because you release code without alerts or without like the specific monitors, and I think the real problem is like at least the way I like to think about it when we're building Keep now is that it actually gets your customers to a point where they're disappointed with like the money they paid for your product, and that's something that can cost you with churn, like your customer leaving you just because you released something that doesn't work properly, and you yourself you don't know about it before your customers, and that's really bad.
Exactly. Exactly. This is absolutely the thing that loses the most trust, right? Your customer says, why do I have to be your QA? Why do I have to find your problems before you do? So yeah, I mean, definitely a huge deal. And it really seems like you found a great way like to where in the process things should fit in. Something that I'm curious, you mentioned the interplay that you have tests before production and then alerts post production. And I was always like, when I look at especially integration tests and system tests, like the higher level testing that we do, a lot of those tests look like they could be monitors at some point. Is that something that you guys are covering at all, or is that someone else's business?
Interesting. I personally didn't thought about like making those test alerts, but like I think it's pretty good idea, like taking your integration or end-to-end tests and like somehow shift them or change them to alerts that can be triggered on your production environment. It's definitely something we will think about.
Yeah, I think that another point that is worth mentioning, and like I think it's like every other startup out there right now with GPT-4 and GPT-3 and everything exploding, like we're thinking about adding a semantic layer for alerts. So instead of having your developers like need to learn how to do alerting for the specific observability or monitoring tool that they use, they can just describe the alert in a textual way, and we have an AI that knows how to
Translate.
translate the textual reference for the alert to the YAML spec that I mentioned before, and then just push it to your monitoring and observability tool. So this is something that we are playing with. Maybe it can fit with the testing.
It works pretty like well, like everything GPT-4 does, but like because the way we think about alerting, about like alert is just text YAML, so that's where those models shine. So
And I love it. Like, I love everything you just said. The idea of a semantic layer for alerts, this seems like it should just be its own blog post. Go tell us what a semantic layer of alerts should be, because it just sounds like, again, like you just like, yeah, how is it not a thing yet? And now that I think of it, if I have ChatGPT, who is a really, really good writer, um, suggest alerts, it can actually write the alert description. Because that's another thing that we've really been struggling with, is alerts that are not clearly actionable, that you read a description and it's not obvious what's going on, and definitely something that leads to fatigue. So if all alerts had, here's what you do when you get one, step one, step through, step three, here's a bot to ask if you need more ideas, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're about to release like what we call fatigue meter. Not sure what's going to be like the name of
the
the
marketing
tool.
name,
Yeah, the marketing name. But like this is the exact point that we want to help with. We want to like it's possible that you have alerts, but again, a good alert has some specific points that you have to touch when you create the alert, and we want to make sure that we can tell you whether your alert is in a good point or it's going to like add to your alert fatigue. And yeah, absolutely, like help you with the description, and if the alert is actionable or not. This is something that we also want to help people with.
Yeah, it was actionable, context, if it's
severity, and like the clear ownership of who needs to wake up in the middle of the night to take care of that.
Amazing. So I'm definitely looking forward to see my alert fatigue score. And we're running at time, and I usually finish the shows asking for one bit of advice for someone who is starting from scratch or struggling with this problem, someone who really wants to get their alerting right. What would you tell them?
My first tip will be to start slow, like start alert by alert. Don't try to like be 100% from the day one. It takes time. It takes some experience. You need to understand what works for you and what's not. Every organization we talk have different like pitfalls and different processes. So my tip is just start slow and be like don't be too hard about not having alerts.
And I think my tip will be like once you go in the on-call path, which means that you wake people in the middle of the night because of alerts. I've been there. I know how hard it can be. Uh, think about your customers in the process. Like, don't alert on anything. Think about when your customers are actually experiencing problems in your product, and like derive the alert from their experience, not from what you think that they might experience.
That's really good advice. And have a lot of empathy for your both your customers and your own team. Seems like good path for success. Tal and Shahar, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
joining us.
Yeah,
It's been
I
insightful.
thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thanks, man.
And good luck with Keep. We will watch and cheer
We will
on for.
we will keep you posted. Pun intended.
Thank you, Gwen.
Bye bye.